Hi, it's Steve and Joe from Freshagenda. And Steve, this week we're having a look at a few different issues. US milk, New Zealand exports and some other things.
Yeah.
Let's start with US milk, shall we?
Okay, so what was the big takeaway for you this week in this?
Well, we've had another month of negative growth in the US, which I think it's maybe 3 out of the last 4 months of being negative. So I suppose the question that everybody's asking, given that there are some regions still growing, some are falling, are we at the bottom in terms of the herd?
I guess the USDA thinks we have bottomed. That could be a very optimistic view, because when you look across the big things that are still impacting farm sentiment and economics, they're facing a number of things that, with feed costs rising, with poor corn crops, weak cattle markets, rising costs, farm values aren't going anywhere, so equities are down, and then banks are saying improve your balance sheet. So we might bounce along for a while, but I think it's a little while before we see some genuine uptick in cow numbers.
Yeah, it's certainly not a happy picture.
No.
And not improving quickly.
And I think the thing to watch from here is where important for markets, and cheese markets are sensitive to where milk production is changing. So if there is an impact of this weaker corn crop and potentially quality in corn, that comes up a bit, where that burns.
And so what that does to product mix.
What it does product mix in the key states. So the cheese-rich states are affected by this. Watch that market.
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
It's going to be an interesting few months. New Zealand exports came out. We got the detail on that this morning.
Yeah. Another strong month, but
strong in terms of milk powders. So I think skim was up over 9, and skim was up over 8, and whole milk up over 9. That makes a big year for whole milk trade.
Certainly does.
I think it's up 14% on the prior year over 12 months. But fats were well down, so that's a price response, because you can see in that chart we've got there the average ship price kicked up.
To China there,
Yeah, and you go back a few months, and when GDT kicked up, this is how it's played through, because this is now being delivered. And there's certainly been a response. I think combined fats trade was down 18% for the month.
Yeah.
So still a fairly patchy, sensitive market.
Yeah, very price sensitive out there on those numbers.
Cheese was strong, growth into China and Japan, and unsurprisingly Australia, where there's a few milk challenges.
Yeah, and some other things that have popped up this week. What else matters?
Well, this is a big one, because there's now lookalikes either side of the Atlantic in terms of leaders. So the UK has got Bojo in charge. Some would call him in charge of Britain, but that's a geographical error. He's now the Prime Minister, and he's still holding his line that he wants to do a no deal on Brexit, which his party will not support, let alone the rest of Parliament. Yeah,
so the Brexit uncertainty continues and will probably deepen, leading up to that 31 October deadline.
Yeah. Second thing, US stocks, butter up, cheddar down. Markets reacted to a little bit of that in terms of butter, so see if that means anything. Cheese stocks are tighter than where they've been, so that's interesting to watch. And then US fluid milk sales tracking along. The fall is under 1%. So I think that's probably significant.
That's probably a good result.
That's probably a good result.
When you look at all the red lines on that chart.
On that chart, the stalactites on that chart. But interestingly, as we discussed earlier, organic sales still in the toilet. Really, that's not very good.
That's a long-term trend, isn't it? They continue to struggle. Yeah. While other organic products are growing.
Milk is struggling. And look, the last one is that Argentina's milk supply remains weak. So as they move back up towards their peak of season, they're still below the profile. And that has ramifications for how much whole milk powder they might produce.
Yeah, we'll come back to that a bit later too, won't we?
Your chart of the week.
Yes, well, the chart of the week, I thought we'd have a look at some projections from the USDA, on global milk production, which we thought were interesting, pretty flat for the top 5 exporters there. But probably the most interesting one there is New Zealand. That 1.4% growth would mean a fairly positive spring on a previous year, which was a positive spring. So fairly bullish there for New Zealand.
As we state there, that would take 3% growth through the second half of the year, which we don't think is unlikely at all. I mean, it's given how big last year was. So when we compare what we've got out there in our current outlook, we are a bit different. So we're certainly not as optimistic on New Zealand, and I think on most we're actually below what the USDA is suggesting. We certainly see Europe a little worse, and as seen there, we still think there's a few challenges in South America come through.
That's for sure. And so, again, the question being, so seems to be a bit of upside for prices when you look at how flat supply is, but Bojo, Trump, all that kind of wider uncertainty is still really keeping a lid on things.
And the volumes that have gone through the trade in the first half of the year, and can that remain the case as prices rise?
Yeah.
So that's an interesting half year coming up.
Yeah.
All right. That's all from us. We'll see you next week.